Hello, this is Michael. I'm going to make a few observations about not eating salt. I remember that when I was a kid, I vaguely remember that my mother tried serving me potatoes, and I wouldn't eat potatoes. She discovered that she could serve me rice, but my mom claims that rice has no taste unless she adds salt to it. Somehow, probably by imitating my mother, I got addicted to putting salt on rice, and I never even thought twice about this. And then when I was living on my own and I was making food from scratch, I was adding salt to everything, and I didn't even think twice about this. I did grow up with a father who's volatile, eccentric, and mentally disturbed, and the only time the house was calm was when my dad was asleep, and I'm not sure if that had something to do with my chronic fatigue, because I remember having trouble getting into bed, and then at some point my mother stopped making me go to bed before she went to sleep. I was in a graduate program I didn't like, and I'm not sure what that had to do with anything, but I had obsessions with what food ingredients are good and bad for you, and then I finally read a blog about this phenomenon called orthorexia nervosa, not anorexia. And then I had obsessions with what food ingredients are good and bad for you, and then I kept a mental list of what I should and shouldn't eat, and then at one point, I was convinced that I should only eat fruit, and then 3 days later, I added in fish so I would avoid feeling too guilty about myself due to the possibility of not eating protein-containing foods. And right after I started this weird fruit diet, my chronic fatigue disappeared immediately, like overnight. Like I was totally refreshed, like. And between the time I was 14 and about 24, I was chronically fatigued, and I was going through a fog all day, like my head hurt and I could barely stand it. And I thought at different times that maybe society was messed up for making me keep a schedule that I had to wake up at a certain time and go to sleep at a certain time. I vaguely thought something was wrong with me, like a disease. I don't think this is purely psychological. There could be psychological factors, but I know that the salt is probably not that healthy. I know that by accident, just by not eating cooked food, I wasn't adding salt to any of the fruit I was eating. Right after I stopped being fatigued, I hallucinated that grains were the cause of my fatigue. But then after I read the blog about orthorexia nervosa, I realized that my obsessions with food and my weird diet was a mental disorder, and then I started slowly reverting back to eating certain cooked foods, although I have not actually reverted back to eating blatant junk food. Like, I haven't gone back to eating donuts and pizza and french fries, but I have not been adding salt to anything. And there's not even agreement about how much salt you should eat, how much sodium you should eat, but one opinion says you don't need more than 250 milligrams of sodium per day to survive well. I feel okay right now. I don't consciously feel that I can attribute any problem to not eating salt. I do eat celery, not every day, but semi-regularly. I've had some seaweed that I bought in an Asian store, although I suppose it's possible to eat too much seaweed because it might be high in iodine. And somehow I never developed obsessions with animal rights. My obsession was that cooked food's bad for you. I think it started when I was 16, when my anxiety about dying or impending death morphed into a fear of food ingredients because I saw some books about health and diet in my local public library. If you eat too much sodium, it's going to make you have to retain water to dilute the salt, and that's going to cause the volume of your blood to be higher than it should be, which is going to make your heart have to work too hard. It's going to make you bloated, and I don't know what other problems it's going to cause. And we know that if you drink even a little bit of ocean water, you will die immediately. Salt isn't everything. Oh, I forgot about water. I actually don't remember drinking water frequently. I don't remember how much water I was or wasn't drinking. I vaguely don't remember drinking a lot of water, so I think there's a combination of psychological factors, too much sodium, not enough water. Right when I started this weird fruit diet, by accident I was getting more water. I was not insightful when I started it. All the canned foods have salt, or at least most of them do. I figured out that you can make bread without salt. All the breads in the store have salt in them. It doesn't matter whether the bread is the artisan bread or the commercially made bread, they all have salt. Some people believe in a myth that you have to add salt to bread. There is such a thing as Tuscan bread or Pane Toscano. I read this. I actually went to Tuscany in Italy, but at the time I was still following my fruit diet, but then just after I left Florence while I was still in Italy, I irrationally tried a little bit of Italian food, but I didn't try the bread in Tuscany, so I actually don't know from experience whether Tuscan bread is a thing, but it's probably a thing. It's made without salt. So it's not like I'm the first person to make bread without salt, but also matzah is traditionally made without salt, although I've also seen matzah that does have salt. It's a cracker that's supposed to be only made with flour and water. But most of the prepared breakfast cereals have sugar and salt. Most of the processed foods in the store all have salt in them. I've heard that you should eat less than 2,500 milligrams of sodium a day. I actually bought some food at stores in Europe. Remember in Greece, at least, on food labels, they say the number of milligrams or grams of salt instead of the number of milligrams of sodium, because we know that salt is sodium and chloride. So yeah, you can actually make your own bread without salt. You add less yeast because salt actually inhibits the growth of yeast. If you just try it multiple times, you can figure out how to make it. I just haven't been adding salt to anything. I've just been making all my own food from scratch, but I reverted back to eating cooked food, so at least I'm not following that weird raw food diet. But somehow I never developed an interest in animal rights. I had some ground turkey recently. It's not kosher either. Yeah, my mom won't allow non-kosher meat in the house, but I'm an atheist now. I didn't get struck by lightning for eating non-kosher meat. But yeah, this is my own personal anecdote about not eating salt and my chronic fatigue